On July 2026, a thermal bloom registered over the Damietta Port on the Mediterranean coast. A drone bypassed defenses and detonated inside the terminal. The strike hit two critical assets simultaneously: the American-owned floating storage and regasification unit, Energos Winter, and the LNG carrier, Gaslog Salem. The vessels were conducting a live transfer operation. Over 130,000 cubic meters of highly volatile liquefied natural gas were actively flowing between the hulls when the munitions struck. The expected thermodynamic outcome of military-grade explosives detonating near a payload of that volume is a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion, or BLEVE, a localized catastrophe. A massive fire raged on the Energos Winter and spread quickly to the Gaslog Salem, yet the primary payload never ignited. The physical assets survived. The true impact of the strike registered entirely on a systemic level. Advanced maritime engineering insulated the fuel from combustion, but the ensuing geopolitical and economic shockwaves successfully paralyzed regional energy grids and maritime insurance markets. To understand how the cargo survived, we look inside the Energos Winter. This 3D cross-section reveals the membrane containment system. The primary defense against the external blaze is a double-layered metallic membrane composed of a specific alloy known as Invar. Invar is 36% nickel mixed with steel. This precise metallurgical combination yields a near-zero thermal expansion coefficient. A fire can engulf one side of this 0.7 mm barrier, while the liquid natural gas on the other side remains entirely stable at -162 degrees Celsius. Positioned directly behind the Invar sits a secondary defense: dense panels of reinforced polyurethane foam, or RPUF. This insulation caps the maximum evaporation, or boil-off rate, of the cargo at a mere 0.085% per day. Extreme heat could not penetrate the hull fast enough to vaporize the liquid. By keeping the boil-off rate microscopic, the insulation prevented the massive internal pressure buildup that would otherwise tear the ship's structure apart. Metallurgical precision at the millimeter scale defeated a direct kinetic strike. The hull integrity held, but the active transfer hoses connecting the Energos Winter and Gaslog Salem presented a highly exposed vulnerability. This schematic outlines the transfer infrastructure between the vessels during the blaze. As the fire intensified, the ships began to physically drift. This movement activated the Trelleborg Emergency Shutdown, or ESD, mechanics. When the deviation between the hulls reached exactly 5 meters, the ESD-1 logic gate triggered. The system instantly killed the transfer pumps and clamped the distribution valve shut on both ships. The flames continued to push the two vessels further apart, stretching the heavy transfer hoses toward their breaking point. At 7 meters of deviation, the system executed the ESD-2 logic gate. A mechanical dry brake severed the connection cleanly before the hoses reached their maximum extension limit, instantly sealing the valves on both ends. The automated severing freed the vessels. The crews evacuated successfully, and port authorities towed both ships outside the sensitive inner zones of the Damietta complex. The strict mathematical logic of the ESD system prevented liquid fuel from spilling into the open air, starving the fire of the secondary fuel required to trigger a larger explosion. The automated systems inside the port isolated the physical damage, but the strike itself was part of a rapidly escalating regional conflict in July 2026. Hours before the Damietta incident, U.S. and Saudi forces launched joint strikes in Iraq, while Iranian forces fired ballistic missiles into Jordan. The targeting of the Egyptian port was calculated. This map plots the simultaneous strikes in Iraq and Jordan alongside the Damietta attack, an operation telegraphed 48 hours earlier on Iranian state television. The television broadcast identified Damietta as a retaliation target for a Ukrainian attack on an Iranian vessel in the Caspian Sea. As highlighted here, the Damietta facility processes 5.2 million tons of LNG annually, operating as a primary artery for European gas exports. This strike extended the danger zone thousands of miles beyond the traditional maritime choke points of the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea, directly into the eastern Mediterranean. The operation was designed to strike American-owned maritime infrastructure while choking off Europe's alternative energy supplies. The drone strike was a calculated maneuver to redraw the geographic map of regional energy vulnerability. The vessels survived, but global maritime insurance markets panicked immediately. Major protection and indemnity clubs, covering 90% of the world's fleet, instantly canceled war risk coverage for the Gulf and Arabian Sea regions. To secure passage, shipping carriers were forced into extreme buyback facilities, where special coverage premiums spiked to $200 million per voyage. This financial extortion forced a mass rerouting of global shipping lanes. Traffic through established arteries plummeted as operators navigated around the conflict zones to avoid the punishing new risk parameters. Carriers passed these costs directly down the supply chain. Companies like Hapag-Lloyd and CMA-CGM levied immediate emergency conflict fees, adding up to $4,000 to the cost of shipping a single container. The strike also triggered a localized crisis for the Egyptian government, forcing officials like Minister of Petroleum Karim Badawi into urgent crisis management. Due to demographic pressures and declining output from domestic fields, Egypt had recently transitioned to a country heavily reliant on imported gas. The nation's supply chain balances strictly on imports of piped gas from Israel and a leased fleet of floating regasification units. A disruption to a single leased unit like the Energos Winter threatens immediate cascading power grid failures and industrial shutdowns across Egypt. The vulnerability extends to the vessel's owner, New Fortress Energy, a company battling massive quarterly losses that relies heavily on the revenue from these Egyptian lease contracts to stay solvent. The strike exploited the tight interdependency between Israeli export pipelines, American-owned floating infrastructure, and Egyptian domestic electricity demands. The Damietta incident exposes a severe gap between thermodynamic engineering and economic resilience. Floating storage and regasification units can no longer be treated as standard commercial vessels. They are high-value, static strategic targets integrated deeply into national power grids. To protect these assets, operational expenditure models will have to permanently incorporate tactical military defenses, including drone jamming and point defense systems. If global supply chains fail to decouple from these highly targeted choke points, the macroeconomic consequences will scale rapidly. A one-month disruption in the region risks driving Asian spot LNG prices up by 130%, forcing massive inflationary pressure onto importing economies worldwide. The drone strike on the Damietta port was a successful stress test of global supply chains. In the modern geopolitical theater, a ship's ability to survive a blast is irrelevant if the global market cannot survive the insurance premium.